Hi, and welcome to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Markowitz.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
Welcome to today's podcast.
We are talking about something that is currently interesting to both of us, both Joel and I, because we have people in our lives that are dealing with some pretty severe situations that are causing a lot of pain. And so we were talking about the difference between pain and suffering. There's a quote that I heard recently, which is that pain is not optional in life. Like, we're always going to experience pain, but suffering is optional. And so what is the difference between pain and suffering? So why is pain not optional and why is suffering optional?
I guess pain is something we all have, right? So I actually don't know the answer to this. I feel like you asked me, and I'm like supposed to be this pontificating, like, wisdom Zen master to have the answer. Like, she's looking at me.
Well, I'm looking at you because you're the only other person in the room.
Well, I know that.
I wasn't necessarily asking you. It was more of like it was an open-ended question. It was a rhetorical question. It was a question to get your, thoughts moving. What is the difference between pain and suffering?
I think, I would say pain is something we all, it happens. It's a physicality thing. Like, you feel pain all your life physically. Like, you might be sick or feel pain and stuff. And then you have varying levels of pain. Mm-hmm. How I interpret that would be that you can kind of say, okay, this is painful, but I'm going to either grow past it or move past it, or I can stay here and kind of wallow in it. And that's the part we can choose. The wallowing nature is, I guess, what I would say would be sticking with that suffering. That was all over the place. Does that make sense?
No, it wasn't all over the place. Yeah, well, pain is, like you said, it's the base root of pain is physical. Our bodies tell us when something is painful versus pleasurable, indicating that pain is probably damaging to the body, and pleasure is nourishing to the body in some capacity. So pleasure are our receptors that are rewarding us for behavior that our body likes. And pain is a warning that something is happening that is probably in some way destructive or damaging or will harm the body's long-term ability to, say, survive. And our consciousness, our brains, our minds, our emotions have evolved the same thing. Pain is an indication that something is damaging, and pleasure is a reward mechanism for doing something that the body or our consciousness or emotions believe is going to be healthy in some way. Now, sometimes this gets mixed up. We eat sugar, and our pleasure receptors go, ooh, sugar, we like sugar, because our brains know that this is a boost of something that will give us energy. Our brains basically run on sugar of some form. And so in the past, when food was more difficult to come by, something like fruit or something that had a sugar like a sugary,
sucrose,
like something that had sugars in it was good for us. And so now we've evolved pleasure receptors for, sugar is awesome. And now we're in a time period of sugar abundance. In fact, sugar overabundance. So our pleasure receptors are still going, awesome, that's a healthy thing for us, when really it may not be. And it could cause long-term damage. So our wiring is not always, like, dead on. Like, there's that whole cognitive bias that says if it's natural, it's good. And that's not necessarily true.
Well, our bodies and minds haven't caught up with technology. The ability to produce these abundant resources that we're not used to having in abundance necessarily. Right.
And so what ends up happening is that when we experience pleasure, we end up putting meaning over it. And we do the same thing with pain, right? Like, I'm eating this thing that has a lot of, sugar in it and maybe carbohydrates, and I say that's good, and oh gosh, I love Wendy's Junior Bacon Cheeseburger or whatever, because it's got everything in it that I love. It's got beef and bacon and wheat and carbohydrates and mayonnaise and yum. And so we say that we love, Wendy's Junior Bacon Cheeseburger or something. So we put a meaning over it. And so now our pleasure is attached to this meaning. And the same thing happens with pain. We experience something that we assume is bad for our body because our receptors are saying this could potentially be damaging. And what ends up happening is we end up putting a narrative over this pain.
Yeah.
And the narrative or the meaning is oftentimes where our suffering comes from.
So we started talking about this because we have a lot of people that we know at various levels of knowing them, from acquaintance to
family members
to friends,
right.
that a lot of the people that we know are going through some tough times right now. And we've been a lot of discussion. We have lots of talks and long drives and things about people's problems, because we like to be problem solvers.
Right. And so in particular, a lot of what we've been seeing lately is divorce.
Yeah.
We've been seeing infidelity. We've seen custody battles.
Yeah.
Really painful custody battles.
Over children, yeah.
Yeah. And we've been on the receiving end of some pain, I would say, through some of the circumstances that we've been in the last few years.
Yeah.
So
and maybe we've caused pain.
And
we've contributed to it.
We've contributed to pain, most assuredly.
Unknowingly or knowingly, I don't know.
Right.
Hopefully not, but I'm sure that it's there.
Yeah. So pain happens, right? Like, we're going to, while navigating the world, we're going to run into things that our bodies have a trigger mechanism that says this is not healthy or good for us.
Yeah.
Now, most of the time, those trigger mechanisms are pretty spot on, so we learn to trust them. And sometimes they're not. Just like massive amounts of sugar will almost always give you a pleasure, trigger until you're puking your guts out because you've eaten way too much sugar. And the same thing with things like alcohol. The same thing happens with pain. Sometimes our trigger mechanisms for pain are there, and we're actually not fully calibrated to the situation correctly. So we're experiencing pain, and there's nothing damaging about the situation. It might just be uncomfortable, and it might just be pressure.
You're going to feel a little pressure.
Little pressure. Was that Brian Regan, who said that doctors never like to use the word pain?
The comedian Brian Regan, yeah.
Right. He's like, they only use the word pressure. You're going to feel a little pressure here. And it's actually, like, extremely painful. So sometimes we're experiencing pressure or pain, and there's really no need for it because the situation may be just uncomfortable, and we haven't expanded our context to include that uncomfortable situation or situation. And then the next time we do, our context is expanded, and that's no longer painful, right?
Yeah.
Or uncomfortable. So pain is not always a bad thing, but the difference between pain and suffering is the narrative we place over it. Right? Like, I'm experiencing something that feels icky, and I shouldn't be.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I shouldn't have to.
Well, especially in our world, when we have a pill to pop for anything that we feel. Like, I got a stomach ache or a headache. I take a aspirin and my headache goes away. Well, any pain should have some kind of pill or some kind of solution. I shouldn't have to feel this. This is not appropriate.
Right. And sometimes those moments of pain are not short term. Sometimes they're situations where the old phrase is the way out is through. There is no pill to pop. There is no immediate fix. There's you got to get through the situation. The way out is through. And so you have to keep facing this situation over and over and over. And so what is the narrative that is wrapping this situation for you? Is it one of, I shouldn't have to? And a lot of times the suffering comes from an over-attachment to your ego. Right? Like, your ego, which is the part of you that wants to live, the ego, which is the part of you that you most likely are describing to other people when they say, tell me about yourself, right? Like, tell me about yourself. And basically you launch into a little speech about your ego, right? Well, yeah. I blah, 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 and I'm the kind of person who likes to blah, 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 blah. And I. And all of these I's basically are your ego, which is the thing that wants to live. Right, and really gets, like, incredibly scared when it thinks you're about to die, and the ego, which is the thing that wants to live on. And so when you over-attach to this ego, to this thing that really wants to live, and your ego has some pretty sophisticated fight, flight, or freeze mechanisms because it's been trying to live for a long time, way, way past your birth, right? The ego itself has been trying to live forever, right? In various people, right? Like, everybody's ego wants to live. It's the thing in us that wants to keep living. And so you attach to your ego, and your ego gets righteously indignant. When it feels pain, your ego's like, I shouldn't have to deal with this, right? I should be able to, do a fight, flight, or freeze mechanism. And it's trying to survive. Generally, when the ego gets so righteously indignant about this pain and creates a story of suffering, it's generally because, it thinks that you're about to die. in some way, or your safety is threatened.
Well, I think the result then is try to command and control, take over, like really try to control your situation, control your environment, lock down on something and like force the issue in a lot of ways, which can be really damaging because life is more fluid than one solution out or whatever. Right? I know that's abstract, but I've seen this in people recently where like you always have this great question: would you rather be right or would you rather be happy? And I see so many people that they get so attached to this idea of having to be right, having to be in control, that it actually increases the pain they're feeling because they can't let go at all. They can't give an inch.
Right.
And it has to be this one way. I shouldn't have to feel this pain. It has to be this way. And if it can't be that way, then I'm going to just, that's it. And I'd rather take the pain than bend it all and actually be happy in this situation.
Right. We were recently talking to somebody who was refusing to have a conversation with their ex-husband. They absolutely refused to have a conversation with them. And their justification was, and they're co-parents, right? Like they're raising children together, basically, without any communication happening between the two of them. And the husband is trying to have a conversation with his ex-wife, right? Like, or the ex-husband, right? It's like, please sit down with me and let's have a conversation about how to raise these two kids, right? And they've been separated for a while and divorced for a while. And she refuses to sit down and have a conversation with him because her justification is, we'll never come to any agreement on anything, so therefore there's nothing to talk about. Yeah. And it's really fascinating to me because their relationship is always, right? Like, it's just, I mean, there's always ickiness being created, and there's always like, I mean, it's just a mess, right? Yeah. The relationship is just a mess. And in large part, it's the inability to be willing to be wrong. It's the inability to sit down and have a conversation and have your ego not assume that being wrong in the situation means it's about to die, which you can tell that there's a strong correlation there.
Yeah. I think the question I ask then is, okay, if I find myself, or maybe somebody that's listening finds themselves in a position like this, like they start to sense that they're, I guess there's two sides. There's you're with somebody that you see is in pain, is in having trouble, unwilling to bend. How do you respond to that?
Right.
And then the other question is, if you see that come up in you, because I see this happen to me all the time, my ego gets really bent out of shape, and I'm like, I don't have to humble myself in this area.
Right.
What do we do about that? For me, one of the things is I always feel like growth happens when I can put myself aside. Do I always do this? No, obviously. But I always see opportunities. Like, I see it as an opportunity then to grow as a way for me to be wrong, for me to be happy instead of having to be right.
Yeah.
For me to try to say, okay, where can I grow in this? How can I be a different person? How can I grow through this?
Right.
So that side, it's easier for me because I can control that. Like, it's in my hands. Like, if it's on my side. Now, I'm certain, as my wife, you could tell me, I probably don't see that all the time. I probably still have things pop up where I'm not willing to bend, or I have struggles in this and everything. But at least it's in control. Somebody listening might say, well, yeah, that's easy when it's you, but if it's somebody else,
right?
How do you respond to somebody that's difficult? Right. You see them, maybe they're difficult, they won't connect with you, or they're going through pain. You can't help. How do you deal with that kind of person? And that's something that I think is the bigger question in my mind.
Right. Yeah, and I think that when we were talking about all these people who are going through these painful situations and they're suffering, I personally believe needlessly. However, it feels very real to them, right? Their suffering feels very real and not a choice, right? Suffering never feels like a choice. Why would you choose to suffer? And so it's a question of what can you do as a person to lower your suffering, to increase your context, and to deal with people who won't, like, they perpetually are in suffering, or at least it feels like they are. Some people are perpetually in suffering. My dad used to say, some people don't know they're alive unless they're in pain. And it kind of feels that way sometimes. You know, you're interacting with somebody, it's like, dude, why are you always struggling, right? Like, why are you always doing this to yourself?
Why are you a month behind your bills? Why are you always having a fight with whoever you're in a relationship that month with?
Right.
Why are you and your kids always fighting and your kids are acting out? Like, why are you always having all these struggles?
Why is it always struggle? And if you're in a relationship in some capacity, like this person, this ex-husband with this ex-wife, He can't do anything about her. Right? Like, she's going to stay that way, right? And what if you're dealing with somebody who's kind of a nutter butter, right? Like, what if they're not right? What if they're crazy? Now, these two people have children together. So they're co-parents. So they cannot separate. On some level, they're always going to have a relationship with each other on some level, because their DNA is, shared with these children. And so, what do you do, right? Like, what can you do? And the answer is not easy. Right? It's not an easy one. It doesn't feel like a fix. In fact, it feels like you're doing nothing. But the only thing you can do is be excellent.
Yeah.
Right? Like, that's the only thing you can do. The only thing you can do in any situation is be the absolute best version of yourself. And the world will go crazy around you. It will. Like, sometimes you'll be in the eye of the storm. Sometimes you'll be surrounded by absolutely nut job people. You want to surround yourself with high quality people if at all possible, right? You want to surround yourself with people who are into development, who have the same values that you have. You want to be with people who energize you and help you become a better version of yourself. Definitely. You want to spend the majority of your time with them. However, it is almost impossible to live in a world in which you are not in some capacity but interacting with a couple of people who insist upon suffering.
Coworkers, family members, people in your community, right? The people at the store that, have an issue that day, whatever. You live in the real world.
That's right. This is the real world, and not everybody takes development and personal growth seriously.
Yeah.
And so the only thing you can do is be awesome. That's it. That's all you can do. And so I look at the situation of this ex-husband and this ex-wife and their kids. And their kids primarily live with the mom, right? Like, that's who they spend, 75% of their time with. And the mom is not a particularly nice person in a lot of ways. And so the ex-husband, there have been times when I've had conversations with him where he's like, I just don't know what to do. Like, yeah. I'm not sure what to do, because this, like, what am I going to do? How do I make sure that my kids, aren't shitheads, basically? And the answer is be amazing. Be amazing. Be the most excellent version of yourself possible, because they will spend time with you and they will see the contrast.
Yeah.
They will spend time with you and you will rub off on them. Being an amazing, excellent human being always shines through. Always, right? And sometimes it shines through so brightly that, in the past people have put you to death because you were so awesome. I look at the example of, Jesus of the Greek scriptures. And I see somebody who, we've been talking about, because you and I both were raised in religious households and had large indoctrination around, Christianity in our lives. And we've both expressed that, or at least I don't know if you've expressed this. I thought you did as well, but I feel like the Jesus of the Bible is kind of an amazing person, at least the way that the account is written.
Yeah. Most people, if they look at the account, wouldn't say, oh, that guy was a horrible person. Like, they're like, oh, he had some good ideas.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's a nice guy. He's a good...
Yeah, that wasn't a bad guy, right?
Yeah.
And so there's something to be said for, I think, fashion, like finding characters like the Jesus character, finding characters like the Gandhi character, finding these amazing versions in the past, and recognizing, sometimes they were put to death like Jesus, right? I think he just shone so brightly. I think he was just such a compelling character of the time that he shone a little too bright for the time. Like, they couldn't handle that. And so it wasn't like that was a failure story, though, because his example now influences, regardless of the reality of it, right? Like, regardless of the accuracy or the truth of it, kind of doesn't matter to me. It's mostly about this person being so incredible that even though, according to the story, he was put to death, he has influenced billions of people, right? Yeah. At this point, billions of people are supposedly Christian. So influence billions of people to go, hey, maybe we should be nicer to each other, right? Yeah. Not speaking for Christianity itself. Christianity has not always said, let's be nicer to each other. But the character of Christ has generally, or Jesus has generally encouraged people to be nice to each other. And I think that's an example. Same thing with Gandhi. The same thing with lots of other characters, that the only thing they could do is be truly excellent, and that shone through.
So that's cool if we're like having to interact with somebody directly. But what, I'm guessing that people listening, and you and I have this too happen. We go through life and we have these people that we're not the main character in their lives, but we have other friends and acquaintances that we've had come and go here in the past few years that have gone through some tough times. And they don't necessarily, sometimes they solicit us for coaching and advice, and sometimes they don't, but it's so frustrating to me to watch people going through pain and suffering. Pain's inevitable, suffering's a choice, as you say, but to watch them like perpetually stay in this state, and it's like, I don't know if there's anything like, there's probably nothing we can do because people are going to do what they're going to do, but it's like, is there something I can do for this person? Like, help them not feel this all the time, because I'm sitting here watching them, and it's like,
Yeah.
And then there's also this thing I have, like, you're the sum of the 5 people you spend the most time with. So it's almost like you want to stay away from people like that because they can tend to cause you to start thinking these ways too. And you don't want to treat people that way. You don't want to just shun people because they're in a perpetual state of suffering, but then they could also be an influence in you. So it's like this really fine balance of the people in our lives that we interact with on a daily basis or on a weekly basis or whatever.
Yeah. Our
audience and us.
Well, the two things that come up for me when you say that are, the first one is the phrase that you always use, which is the rising tide raises all ships.
Yeah.
And so again, being awesome is an influence to others.
Yeah.
When they see that you can have a truly happy relationship with your mate, when they see that you can have success, that's possible.
Possibility probably really inspires people.
Totally.
They don't think something's possible.
Right.
Like, whoa. I didn't know that was possible.
Yeah, exactly. And especially, the prophet is without honor in their hometown. Like, most of the people in our lives, the fact that there's like that we're so readily available to them, it makes it seem as if, like we're just kind of normal people, which we are, right? We're normal people. I'm sure most people in my family...
Unless you look in that closet right over there.
Right.
You'd be horrified.
That's right. We're normal except for that stuff in the closet. No, if my parents knew how much people pay me to coach them through their problems, I think their jaws would probably drop.
Yeah.
And it's because I'm their kid.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I'm just their kid, so I don't know anything, right? And so I think that's pretty...
I used to change your diapers.
Yeah.
How could you know
common.
This?
Like when the people are in your life, they're like, like your cousins or something. Like, I grew up with you. I remember when you were a total dick back when you were in high school.
Fight. Yeah.
Right? Like, they don't think that you know anything. However, so you're just like them, right? Like, you're just a normal person like them. And when you have a truly excellent life, when they see you having success, and when they see you having relationship and financial and, like your success, and you're just kind of a person who holds space around them and has peace, and they get around you and they're like, there's something kind of different about them. I think that definitely allows them to sort of democratize happiness, right? Because you're not some celebrity on TV as far as they're concerned. You're just a person. And so if you can have happiness, they can have happiness, which is great, I think. So that's number one. And the second thing I was thinking was the phrase, when the student is ready, the teacher will come.
Yeah.
Right? Just being available. Like, it's not always time to coach. However, you can make yourself available to coach if somebody needs it.
When the question is asked.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I've noticed that, like, I'll just kind of, like I'll be talking to somebody who I love dearly and I know isn't into personal development, right? And keeps shooting, themselves in the foot over and over and over again. And I love them because they're somebody who's a family member, say, and I can't really do anything for them, honestly, but I love them. So I'll just kind of go, well, you could think about this. And if they bite, then now they'll give me the opportunity to help coach them through the situation. And if they don't, then the student isn't ready. And I'm not their teacher, right? So I'm not always the teacher, and I'm okay with that. When the student is ready, the teacher will come. And maybe the student will never be ready, but that's not me, right? That's them. They've got to determine that.
Certainly.
Yeah, and so pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. And if somebody chooses to suffer, that might be what they need for the moment in order to get through whatever it is they're trying to get through.
The other thing, and I know we need to probably wrap up, but the other thing I've noticed too is that sometimes when you are living or attempting to live an excellent life, it peeves people off that aren't right there with, like, they're not at that level. They are suffering, and it almost makes them angrier and feel like they're suffering. Like they feel like you're doing something to them by living well. Have you ever experienced this?
Yeah.
Like you're around them and they're like, how dare you be happy almost. Like, and so it's an interesting experience to have that happen. I've had this happen recently, and it was like, whoa, like it makes the person mad and makes them almost go into more of a tizzy and more suffering. So sometimes that example, they see that as an example, but other times to them it's more demoralizing because that's how they've chosen to be, and there's nothing I can do about that. But I've noticed that as
sometimes
a pattern sometimes that comes up.
Well,
often not, but I think there's a particular type of person or a particular type of people that sometimes just have that as an experience, which is really interesting to me.
Yeah, well, I think of it as two people dancing. If one of them stops, it's not long before the other one feels kind of self-conscious, because the dance, like dancing is a social thing. Yeah. For the most part,
when you kind of look foolish doing it,
and you feel like, people feel like they do.
But if you're doing it all together, everybody's doing it.
Everybody's being silly
together.
Right. Yeah. We're all gyrating our bodies in kind of weird ways, but we're all doing it together, so it's okay. And if two people are dancing and one person stops and just like blankly looks at the other person, it doesn't take long for that person to realize that they're dancing, right? Whereas before they might have just gotten lost in the moment. And I see this as a lot of times these unhealthy dynamics and these unhealthy interactions, they're like dances, right? They're like awkward gyrations of, sort of the conversation and communication of the body. And when somebody just stops, right? Like they just refuse to participate in that icky transaction or that icky dynamic, that unhealthy dynamic, the other person becomes really self-conscious, right? Like they become really aware of their bad behavior. And they might get mad, and one of the sort of trigger responses might be to push you to dance with them, right? Like it might be that they don't want to stop dancing, but they don't want you to stop dancing, and so they're going to try to push you to dance with them. And I think that's what you're getting. Yeah. I think though, if that person just flat out refuses to get involved in that situation,
dance somewhere else. Or you go somewhere else, let them dance where they're dancing. Basically.
Yeah, like they'll either go dance with someone else, or after they get through that like awkward phase, the self-consciousness will now help them to stop dancing. Does that make sense? Yeah. So I think that sometimes does trigger sort of this, like you've put a mirror up to them. I've experienced this on the other side where I was dancing and the other person refused to, and I felt like I'm like, oh, I'm kind of being an asshole. I feel bad about that. And then it's kind of like, oh, why'd you make me feel like an asshole? And then of course you realize they didn't make me feel anything. I was behaving in a way that I felt self-conscious about, and then I have to deal with that. So again, if the student is ready, the teacher will come. So if you're in a situation where that person is capable of being a student, or if you're in that situation and you're capable of being a student and the other person refuses to quote unquote dance with you, then they have become a teacher for you.
Yeah. So what are your thoughts? Let us know. Go over to personalityhacker.com, or you can join us on the Facebook page. It's facebook.com/personalityhacker, or on Twitter. We couldn't fit personality hackers. It's personality hack, HACK, as our Twitter handle. And we would love to have you check in, introduce yourself, be a part of the discussion, the community. And let us know.
Yeah.
What have you encountered in this?
Right.
Are you in pain and suffering? Are you just feeling pain, but you've gotten past the point of suffering? How have you dealt with this?
What do you see the differences being?
Yeah. Let us know what you think. And I guess we'll talk to you in the next podcast.
Yeah.
Peace out.